friends, it's Anne Eileen Thompson. Hey, welcome back to the Faith Driven Leader podcast, where we just love to hear and share the stories of amazing faith-driven leaders. Well, if you follow the podcast, you know that I've been on a little bit of an unplanned break, but it's great to be back. I've been caring for my mom through some health challenges. I am really glad to report that she's doing so much better, such a blessing, and I've learned a lot in this season of caring for her as her health has taken a hit, but it's just great to be back. It's great to be back. I also want to share that I am working on my first book. It's going to be all about career transitions. How do we navigate our career with God? Not just about how we welcome him into the day-to-day of our work, but how do we actually navigate a career with him? I will look forward to sharing a lot more with you as the coming year evolves. But no, as we go through the year, we'll be diving into these career path stories with our guests, along with all the other faith-led leadership lessons that we get to learn from them. So I'm excited today to kick off with a conversation with Kirk Perry. Kirk was most recently, he's just retired, but was most recently the president and CEO of Circana, which was an organization that was kind of the merger of IRI and NPD. He led that merger to happen and just recently stepped down to retire. But Kirk is also a seasoned kind of CPG and brand strategist with about 30 years of CPG and tech experience at Procter Gamble as well as Google. He has a really deep understanding of the global consumer marketplace. He's worked in the US, he's worked internationally, and spent several years at Google as well as the president of Global Client and Agency Solutions, which was a brand new arm, if you will, of Google. So Kirk just has so much invaluable experience in the business world as a faith-led leader. We're going to learn a lot about that today. Kirk also serves on several boards, some publicly traded companies like J.M. Smucker and Kenvue, also some privately held companies like Chick-fil-A. He's rotated off the board just recently of Elf Beauty, and he's sat on so many other countless boards. It would take me several minutes to tell you all of them, but Kirk is very accomplished, but so humble and approachable and wise. I actually first met Kirk when I was at P&G, and I have kind of followed his career and his journey. I was really just so inspired by, like I said, his approachability and his collaborative, faith-led leadership. So without any more preamble, let's hop over to the conversation with Kirk Perry. Well, hey, everybody. Thank you. Welcome back to the Faith Driven Leader podcast. I am so excited to talk to Kirk Perry today. Kirk, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited about this conversation. And you and I talked a few weeks ago, and I think I shared with you that when I was in my days as a lowly peon at Procter Gamble, I think I was working in market research. And I came to a meeting when you were leading baby care, because there was a guy that was in my group that was working in baby care. And I was just so impressed with your connection with your team at the general manager level that you sat at the time. And I have followed your career since then and seen you speak in lots of other situations, like at Crossroads and places like that. And I have to tell you, I'm really excited to hear more of your story today and to share it with our listeners.
Well, thank you. I'm glad I didn't put you off in that meeting. So yeah, maybe that was
Not
one of
at
my
all.
better ones.
I think it was probably pretty typical for you from what I understand. Well, Kirk, I love to start off when I talk to leaders by asking them to share with us, like, what is your definition of leadership, and what's the connection between that and your faith?
Sure. So I'm a pretty simple-minded person, and I try to think in easy to understand frameworks. And for me, leadership is the what and the how. The what for me is three elements of what I think leadership is all about. One is vision,
Okay.
because you got to have a clear direction and a picture of where you're going.
Yeah.
Two is people. And
Yeah.
notice I didn't say direct reports or people that you're the manager of or the coach of. It's people, because there is no organizational hierarchy on leadership, right? A leader is someone who has an inspiring vision and gets others to follow, whether they work for that person or not. And so people is critical. It could be people that work for you, could be your organization. but it also could be people who are inspired by the direction that you're heading. And the third piece is results. I call me old fashioned, but I don't care how inspirational, charismatic, vision selling someone is. If they don't deliver what they promise, that's a void of leadership, right? You have to be able
Yes.
to have an inspiring vision, but then deliver on it, at least to some degree, for people to continue to be inspired and follow you. So to me,
Yeah.
that's the what of leadership. The how of leadership, the what is kind of how do I show up as a leader, but the second is how do I act as a leader? And so
Mm.
to me, that's in some ways almost more important. And that is, I there are four things that I believe constitute being a really great leader. The first is humility, being humble. Um, there was a book that Ken Blanchard used to, if you
Yeah.
remember Ken Blanchard, One Minute Manager.
Yeah.
Ken used to talk about the fact that being a leader doesn't, or being a servant leader doesn't mean you think less of yourself. It's just that you think of yourself less.
Yeah.
People think humility, there's called false humility. That people, oh shucks, I want to, you know those people, right? They're just
Yeah.
being falsely humble when they're really not. But people who really put others in front of themselves and serve others, that's what humility is. And I think for me, that is the most important characteristic of a leader. And I tell my organization, whenever I start in a new role, I talk about the fact that I am there to serve them, not the other way around. I don't want them, and we live in a very hierarchical world, so it's very easy for people to say, "Oh, this guy's the CEO, so I'm here to serve him." The opposite of that is true. Like it's the CEO's job to make sure that they serve the organization because your job is to unleash the potential and power. And that's from a position of humility because to be humble, you have to give something away. And that
Yeah.
something away is the power to be able for those folks to be able to do their jobs really. So the first is humility.
So
The
good.
second is authenticity.
Mm.
And I think most every human being sees through a lack of authenticity. Like people say one thing, they do another. We're just talking about this a little while ago. I joke I'm a one take video guy at work. We did because we'll talk about this in a minute, but I'm
Yeah.
transitioning out of my role. But we have 8,000 people in the company, and I would do a video every couple of weeks just to update people on where are we, some key learnings to share across the organization. And then something either I want to go deeper on, a lesson I've learned, a mistake I've made, whatever it is. But I drove my comms people nuts because they wanted to like, hey, can you reshoot that or can you not say that? Can you like, no, this is just who I am. I'll make mistakes, but it's authentically who I am because when
Yeah.
it's the Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat world we live in where everyone wants to see this polished persona. We're all flawed humans, and it doesn't help when people try to be something they're not. And I think
Yeah.
people really are attracted to authenticity, like who you really are. My great grandpa used to tell me, your character is who you really are when no one else is watching you.
Yeah.
When no one else is watching. And that's what I strive to be as a leader. Don't always measure up, but it's definitely what I strive to be. Third thing in the how of leadership to me is vulnerability. Like
Mm.
people want to know you're a human being. You have
Yeah.
feelings, you have emotions. A small example. Last summer, we lost both of our dogs on the same day.
Oh
Horrible,
no.
long story, terrible. And we're very much dog people, and it was crushing. I
Ah,
know
I
that,
bet.
for people that don't have dogs or people like other dogs, don't worry about it. It was wild to lose them both in the same day. But I happened to have a video a couple days later, and I got on there and I got choked up. I was
Oh.
describing what happened, and I got choked up. It was shocking to me how many people reached out to me. I
Mm.
probably had 300 or 400 emails from people in the organization.
Wow.
Not just like, hey, I'm really sorry, but like full on. In fact, one I remember vividly, it was like multiple paragraph note, probably a page and a half email. But in it, she finished up by saying, my kid, we were never dog people, we just got a dog. And my oldest daughter said, Mom, do you realize like this dog is going to be with us in a chapter of our life, but we're their whole book. And I
Hmm.
still remember that.
Oh, wow.
But my point is, when I
Oof.
was vulnerable in
Yeah.
sharing something that was going on in my life, that people were vulnerable right back. And
Yeah.
I think that human connection is through vulnerability. And as leaders, I tell my organization all the time, what keeps me awake at night? What do I worry about? What are some things that are happening in my life that aren't so great? Just so they know that I can identify with the challenges they're facing as well. And
Yeah.
then the fourth thing for me is resiliency. How do you
Mm.
push through those inevitable dips, blips, as some will call them? How do you push through that?
Yeah.
Because leaders should be resilient. Life is not up and to the right. And as the great Rocky Balboa once said, life isn't how hard you can hit, but it's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward, right? And
Yep.
that's really leadership. Think about it in the battlefield. You think about it in the boardroom. You think about it,
Yeah.
on a construction site, whatever it is. Like, how resilient are you to power through those moments, which are inevitably going to happen to all of us in our life? We're going to have those moments, and so, and how do those things for me intersect with my faith? I think, back to the what of leadership, vision. In the Bible, Proverbs, I was going to test my Bible memory here.
The one
29,
about where there's no vision
29:18.
that people perish,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yes, I can remember the verse, but
where there
not
is no
the
vision, the people
reference.
shall
Yeah.
perish. Proverbs
Yeah.
29:18. And people, like, God wired in us a communal gene, right? We are our best when we are in community and people, surrounding yourself with like-minded people. And you think about how Jesus worked in the world. He didn't legislate people to follow him. He didn't force people to follow them. He had this unbelievably clear picture of what heaven was, and what the kingdom on earth should look like, and people followed, right? So I think results, you know do not work for your earthly master, but work for God in heaven, right? There is this notion that you're not just working just to get through the day or muddle through. Like, God expects you to work, in his name, which
Yeah.
to me means, if you have a all-knowing God and someone who put you here for a purpose, you should do your very best every day. You should be delivering something. And people can quibble and argue about, well, is God a capital? I don't know. All I know is God told me to do work as if I'm working for him.
For
So,
him.
and in fact, one of the cool things about the Bible is it talks about work as much as it talks about love.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty darn important work. And so I think for me, it's the what of leadership very much is about, what God ordains us to be, and the how, if you look at the attributes of who Jesus was, right?
I was thinking
I mean, is
exactly
there
this
another
when you
more
were talking.
humble
Yeah. Oh,
person ever to walk the face of the earth? Like, literally, the king of the universe comes to earth in human form, and he washes his followers' feet.
yeah.
He willingly is put up on it. He could have easily invoked his father to take him down, but he, humbly went to God
Yeah.
and said, "Hey, if this is your
Yeah.
will, let it be done." And
Yeah.
so we could be free. And so I think the authenticity, the vulnerability, the resiliency. If you've
Yeah.
seen The Chosen, the mini
Yes.
series, like, it is, to me, one of the best articulations of, I believe, who Jesus was based on what the Bible says, but also the historicity of that time period and what it must have been like, and how. Now, there's
Right.
a lot of filler in there that isn't in the Bible, but they use the cues of history to put in what it probably was like. And so
Yeah.
I just look at that and think, man, the authenticity, the vulnerability, his resilience, because you know, everyone in the hierarchy of Judaism wanted him gone, but
Yeah.
he pushed through. He was resilient, and those seeds became the largest movement in the history known to man. And
Right.
2,000 plus years later, more
People
of
are
the
still
world
following
follows
him.
Jesus than anybody else. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that is my leadership. The little I do know about leadership, those are the things I picked up over the years.
Well, I think it's a very holistic picture of leadership. And, it reminds me of one of the things I held on to from my Proctor days was the 5 E's of leadership.
Mhm.
envisioning and engaging and equipping
Enabling
and enabling and
and growth.
empowering and
Yep.
then
Yep.
executing, like
Yep.
get it done, and I still use those when I talk to folks about leadership. I usually add an extra E about encouraging because I think it's such a critical role that we play as
Mm.
leaders. But you're right, the mirrors and the inspiration we can get, really, the education we can get by looking at who Jesus is
Yeah.
and how he operates is all the education we really actually need to be a great leader if we really truly follow him.
Yeah.
So I love your definition. It's very thorough and very comprehensive of so many of those characteristics that we see in his life.
Well, and I also should add the one caveat that while it seems simplistic, it's very hard to do. I think I usually, one of the things I ask people to do is when I describe how I think about leadership, and I have a document that I actually, borrowed from Bob McDonald at P&G. I did my first general manager training, and Bob at the time, I think he was leading the global fabric care business, but he had this document called What I Believe from his military days, but just sort
Mm,
of what he talked about is his core values slash principles slash executional considerations.
okay.
And in it, he talks about things, one of mine, for example, is um, hire hire for attitude, train for skill. Like
Mm,
that's one. Like I will take someone all day long who wants to learn, who's hungry, and rather than a diva who thinks they know everything and that
yeah.
is very hard to lead, right? So I think
Yeah.
there are things like that. And I ask the organization, and I'll share it with them and share with them, say, hey, this is what I aspire to be. If I fall short, let me know. It's amazing over the years, the number of times someone has reached out to me and said, hey, just wanted to point out you said this, but you did this. And
Yeah.
so it's a really good mirror for me when I hold myself accountable to a broader group of people versus keeping this to myself and going, oh, this is kind of my personal definition. The more people that know and can look at me and say, hey, do you live up to those things that you said you
Yeah.
believe or those leadership models that you espouse? And if I don't, and people who know me well or who don't know me at all, actually, I've had both happen, they'll reach out and say, hey, you fell short on this. And I truly mean feedback is a gift because if you don't hear it, you don't know. Like
Yeah.
sometimes you just get the boiled frog syndrome where you're in the
Yeah.
water and it's turned up, and before you know it, you're boiling to death. And
Yeah.
it's just 1 degree at a time. It doesn't feel that radically different. And I think
Yeah.
that's the challenge of leadership is how do you open that aperture to get that feedback? And for me, it's saying what I believe and then saying if I'm not living up to this, please hold me accountable. And so that's worked for me for 35
Yeah.
years. And
I love that, Kirk. I'm curious, when you share that, recognizing that, especially when you're in the CEO role of a really large organization, for people to give you feedback, there has to be a level of emotional safety for them,
Mhm,
psychological safety for them. And
mhm.
I know lots of leaders who want people to give them feedback, but their people aren't giving them feedback.
Yeah.
What coaching do you give to a leader who wants people to feel safe enough to give them feedback, but they're not getting any?
So I think back to the authenticity, vulnerability, humility piece. One of the things that I have done regularly over the years, whether it's a video recording, I started those when I was at Google. When I left P&G, it was kind of right at the cusp of video being a communication tool. Before that,
Yeah.
it was like town halls and emails, which are super
Yes.
personal. Um, but what I remember what I started doing was sharing feedback people would give me broadly
That's
and just
brilliant.
saying, "Hey, I really appreciate this. Someone pointed this out. Like this is a great example of where I can do better." Or I do it to illustrate maybe where I didn't agree, but I respected whoever shared it with me for sharing it with me. And um, I'm trying to think of a good example recently where someone pointed something out to me. Nothing's coming to mind, but someone recently, I just can't remember the specific example sent me a anonymous email, which I always love the anonymity piece, but I
Yeah.
understand. And they
Yeah.
pointed something out, and I'm like, oh, they just misinterpreted what I like. They genuinely did. So I said, hey, here's what someone said. and I pulled the clip up and I said, here's what I actually said. And I showed the
Yeah.
clip within my video. And it was one of those things I'm like, and I'm not trying to call this person out. I just want to make sure, like, I go back to data. And if there's data to
Yeah.
support what a person's saying, I'm 100% all in. If there's data to refute what that person, I'm also going to share that as well, because I think it's a two-way communication. So I try to role model trust
Yeah.
both ways so people can
Yeah.
feel comfortable sharing with me and know that sometimes I may push back because I may think they're wrong. But having that dialogue, I think, and I've always really tried to do this, is to find people who could spar with me, whatever level I
Yeah.
was in the organization, because I want people to tell the emperor they're wearing no clothes. Like you,
Yeah.
you need those people. And if you have a bunch of yes people, you're definitely going to not deliver on what you say you're going to do, because you need people to point out where you're not going to, where something's off, where
Yeah.
you need people to feel comfortable doing that. So I learned that early on because I've had managers over the years who have invited that, and I've had
Yeah.
managers who have not invited that. And I've
Yeah.
seen the side by side comparisons, and I'll work for those people all day long who
Yeah.
will welcome the feedback, take it, potentially alter course or push back and go, I just disagree with you. And here's why. You don't have
Yeah.
all the information. Here's how I looked at the thing. And they had a back and forth engagement. I just always respected that. And I think, I have the good fortune to work on boards, public company boards, private company boards, and the best management teams are the ones that instead of like just going to a board and saying, I just need to get approval, it's
Yeah.
kind of going through the motions. I think really elicit and engage with the board on, because you bring a certain level of expertise and experience to the table, and the really good ones search it out. They're like,
Yeah.
hey, give me the really, really on this. Tell me
Yeah.
what you think about this and your experience with this work, or what would you do differently? I'm right now, I'm on a board, and the chief growth officer has set up a couple of different one-on-ones with me to better understand what I would do or the challenges they are facing.
Mm.
How would they approach the situation? Really, really good, like open-handed approach versus
Yeah.
like, I'm going to draw in. So all that based on your really simple question of how do you elicit this back and forth? And I think for me, it's those people that truly do role model that.
Yeah.
And then it cascades throughout the organization. Like, hey,
Yeah.
I mentioned this. One of the things I did starting at Google, because I'm happy to share this because again, where I've fallen short sometimes. I was at P&G almost 24 years, 23 and a half years, grew up in the organization. And I used to hold my P&G badge up and say, this is the badge of trust. We all start here. No matter where in the world we go, we all have certain values we hold. We might execute differently, but
Yeah.
so when I go to Google, nobody had that 23 and a half years of experience with me. I go into my new team, and they had this very methodical, mathematical way of assessing team health. And we were building a new organization within Google, a highly successful company, but that was missing a bit of the expertise that this organization was going to be bringing,
Yeah.
and handpicked people from outside of the company, inside of the company. It was a super high performing leadership team. But we did 9 months in an assessment, and there's 5 key factors Google found that mathematically drive success at teams. The biggest and most important is called psychological safety.
Mm. Yep.
And it was the lowest scoring variable on my team.
Really?
And it just, my heart sank when I got the data. I'm like, oh my gosh, like the one thing I thought I was good at,
Yeah.
clearly I'm not. As we dug into it a little bit, I just had one-on-ones with every single member of my team. I'm like, hey, just be honest with me. Tell me what you think I could be doing better. I mean, tell me, first of all, how you're feeling. Second of all, what I could do better. And kind of the thread that I pulled throughout the entire team was, I'm a quick decision maker. And at
Mm.
P&G, I'd gotten so proficient at that over the years. People just trusted it. My team
Yeah.
didn't know me. So we'd be in a meeting,
Yeah.
and I took what I was considered the optimal amount of information, like, all right, let's go. Here's what we're doing.
Yeah.
And what the team asked me to do is, just before you pull the trigger, just go around the table and just ask. Maybe someone who's not always speaking up, or someone who might have a contrarian point of view, or someone just like Socratically pull it
Yeah.
out and take an extra beat. And I did that. Amazing advice. Like
Yeah.
it was just as simplest thing, just to pause, just take a beat, as someone
Yeah.
said, ask the question, get more feedback out there. There were a few times when I made a completely different decision than the
Yeah.
one that I would have made had I not asked one more question. And
Wow.
it didn't really slow us down at all, in the grand scheme of things, maybe a little bit in the meeting, but the right decision in the right amount of time. And
Right.
the next time we did the survey, 9 months later, it was the highest scoring item.
Wow.
And people appreciated that I told them when the results came out, I'm like, I apologize. Like I failed you the first 9 months as a leader because I just didn't stop and ask the question that I should have asked. And I think that opened up, the storytelling within the organization, that I'm willing to admit when I'm wrong. I'm willing
Yeah.
to ask the question, to understand all diverse points of view, and then make the right decision, and then go back and kind of summarize and share with people why I made the decision. I wasn't closing the loop. It was like,
Yeah.
gotta move, gotta move. We're in the tech world. We gotta move quick.
Yeah.
And it was just those simple things that made all the difference in the world.
Yeah. That's super, super like profound, simple. You're right. Not always easy,
Yeah.
but really good input there. So one of the things that I've heard you say before is that once you knew who God says you were and what your identity was in the Lord, you never let your job define your identity. I think this whole question of identity is something that I see a lot of us leaders really wrestle with. I'm called to be a leader. I am a leader. Who are you? I introduce myself with my role or my job or my title. And how have you been able to separate who you are in the Lord from who you are in the
Yeah.
business world, who you are to your organization? Tell us about how you've done that. And maybe there have been some times where you've had to course correct on
Yeah.
that and fallen into some different ideas about identity. But I want us our listeners to learn from you on that.
Yeah.
How have you done that?
So I think it's just a little bit of historical context about me. My family of origin were Creasters, Christmas and Easter. Um,
Yep.
that's how we rolled faith-based wise. And
Yeah.
I had a academic faith, but on my best day, I was probably agnostic. Um, and you can imagine on my worst day. Very interesting growing up period. We were four of us. I was the oldest. My parents had me shortly after both of their 19th birthdays, three of us by the time they were 22, blue
Wow.
collar. We ran out of money before we ran out of month. I mean, it was a hard scrabble, tough upbringing with no faith as a backdrop. So I was very resilient. I was always kind of a bootstrapping guy, pull myself up, put myself the first person in my entire extended family to go to college, paid for 100% of it by myself, worked my way through. Met my wife when I was 18 years old, and she was at a Piggly Wiggly grocery store. And she was, and I didn't know exactly why at the time, but on our first date, I dropped her off, kissed her on the porch, and I got on my motorcycle and said, I'm going to marry her. And I remember coming home, and my brother, who's 18 months younger than me and went to her high school, he's like, well, how'd it go? I'm like, I'm going to marry her. He's like, you're 18 years old. You haven't had a girlfriend more than like 6 weeks in your life. You're going to marry her? What are you talking about? And, 5 years later, we get married. But she had this countenance about her, this
Mm,
faith that defied all logic to me because her birth father was killed when she was 3 years old by a drunk driver. So her mom was
wow.
a 22-year-old widow with
Wow.
two daughters under three and under. I mean, her mom, when I met Jackie, her mom was on husband three going through a divorce.
Mm,
And her grandma was a huge influence in her life, super faithful. So that's a backdrop. We got married.
okay.
It was like go to church because it's the right thing to do. And she was Southern Baptist, the kind where you like bolt yourself into the chair and like, oh my gosh, this from a guy who went twice a year. It was like,
Right. Culture
so
shock.
my life is really two parts. It was the pre-Christ and post-Christ. PC, on
Yeah.
both sides. Not really PC,
Yeah.
but really is 33 years old. So I have four kids. My oldest just turned 32 a few weeks ago, and she's 6 years old. She was diagnosed with kidney cancer.
Mm,
And we were living in Asia at the time. It just completely flipped our world upside down. But I'll condense this story way, way down. But it was the hardest experience of my life because I was this bootstrapping, figure it
Yeah.
out, undergraduate in P&G marketing who got promoted early to brand manager. Like I was just like I worked my tail off to succeed. And and then when Carly got sick, it just flipped everything on its head because I'm like, I can't fix this.
Yeah.
I can't
Can't
control
control
it.
it. Mm.
How is there a God in heaven who supposedly loves all of us, lets a 6-year old get to
Yeah.
the brink of death? And but I found out who God was through this
Mm.
process. It was one of those like lightning bolt moments in my life where I found out who God was. And the fact when I look back, my whole life, he was there. I just
Yeah.
wasn't tuned into the right frequency. And so my identity, though, because of my upbringing, was not based on Christ. It was based on sort of not failing, right? So I
Yeah.
looked at my family. I'm like, all right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to work so hard. I'm going to get a college degree. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to give somebody no reason to fire me. And I'm overseas. I'm a marketing director. This was in 1999, the year my daughter. I got promoted in 7 years to marketing director at P&G, super fast.
Yeah.
And go over to Korea, and we're in the middle of the economic crisis. My girls are 4 and 1. I'm leaving for the office at 6 a.m.,
Mm.
getting home at 9, 10 o'clock at night in a foreign country. So I was at best a part-time dad and a part-time
Yeah.
husband, but I was succeeding. I was going to make my kids' life better than my life was growing up.
Yeah.
And when my daughter got sick, like none of that mattered. I'm like,
Wow.
today is called the present because it's a gift.
Yeah.
No matter how, I remember thinking at one point, I'm like, you know what? If we lose her,
Mm.
what difference did me making her life materially easier than mine matter if I
Yeah.
wasn't there? Like,
Yeah.
why would this matter? So, sorry, long-winded setup to my identity. From that moment forward, instead of, I mean, I still did well and still got promoted super quickly,
Yeah.
but I didn't identify myself by what I did. I knew that my family, Jesus loved me no matter what I did at work.
Yeah.
And it gives you this calmness, this centeredness about like not in pushing back sometimes on things like back in those days, quote unquote, there was no laptop computers and you'd have to
Yeah.
go into the
Yeah.
office to like work on stuff.
Yeah.
And you put it up things on a floppy disk and
We're
maybe
really
what
dating ourselves here, Kirk.
we are dating ourselves.
I remember
I'd
those
tell you
days
more
too.
stories that would make my date even longer. Um, but I, I, I would just say things to my boss like, hey, you know what? Is it possible instead of staying all night Friday and half the day Saturday, can I just get this to you by the end of the day Monday? Be like, sure. It just took a simple ask. I'm like, oh, is this
Yeah.
easy? Or, hey, we've got this trip next week on Wednesday. We'd like you to join. I'm like, hey, my daughter's got her first whatever,
Yeah.
sporting event or school recital. Can I join, for the meeting part and then not make the dinner because I'd like to be there for her to do that? Like, absolutely. It's like this simple ask. And then people understood that's how I rolled. They would schedule around that stuff or ask me.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was at Google and I was meeting with Sundar Pichai, our CEO, and Sundar asked me, sorry, my screen fell asleep because we've been here. I was
Ah.
going to reopen it. Um, Sundar was late to a meeting and I'm coaching Pop Warner football with a group, 25, 13-year-olds. And so he was 20 minutes late to our meeting. He came in and the first thing I said was, Sundar, I'm so sorry, but I'm gonna have to roll out of here in about 20 minutes because I'm gonna have 25, 13-year-olds unsupervised unless I get there on time. He's like, by all means, get out. And it's small things like that, but that
Yeah.
changed. And I think the thing I'll leave you with on this topic about identity, and this came really home, and I think we'll talk about this later, but
Yeah.
when I decided to step down from my role and retire, there's a whole story behind why. But it was a year-long process to go find my successor. And then when the company announced it, over the next couple of days, I got all these, calls and
Yeah.
text messages and emails. And, we had to put it on LinkedIn and tons of people that I used to work with put stuff on there. But then, like, I joke and say, but then I'm dead to them, because then it's like move on because you have a successor and that they should move on. But if I would have put my identity
Yeah.
solely in what I did, then what
That
would
would
I
have been
have?
devastating. Yeah.
What I have? And I remember coming home. I packed up my office the end of January. We're in Chicago and came back to my apartment there. My wife was there, and I said, you know what? It's interesting. I packed up 35 years worth of work, put it in my two boxes. And I was kind of lamenting that more than I'm like, how do I only have two boxes after 35 years? Like one and a half of them was like pictures of you guys and a few artifacts from stops along the way around the world. And she goes, I'm no expert or anything, but in the digital era, I'm certain you don't have as many fact books in your office. And
Yeah.
she, of course, was right. Um, but I said, I said it was so like cathartic for me because I feel like
Mm,
I really didn't. I'm going to miss the people. I loved I love my job. I loved my organization. The company was doing great things. We're on a public path. I mean, it's just all these amazing things happening. But I'm like, I'm ready to do something different. And my identity is not tied up in having to be
yeah.
the CEO or the boss. In fact, when people ask me now, the first couple times I was like, well, I'm transitioning or recently retired. And at first it was like this weird, why am I feeling weird about this? I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm retired. God bless. Like, this is
Yeah.
amazing. Like, I can say that, and that's cool. But I
Yeah.
think our society teaches us to be wrapped up in what you
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
It's a part of who you are for sure, because you spend more waking time at work than
Yes.
any other place in your life. You do. We all do.
Yep.
But if it is who you define yourself as, you'll never want to stop. You'll always put that as the priority when I think what we're commanded to do as believers is we're here to serve and kingdom build. And that might be
Yeah.
as a missionary in the marketplace. And that's what I always
Yeah.
call myself. I'm like, yeah, I'm CEO, but I'm a missionary in the marketplace. And, I'm called to make this better than when I came here, meaning the earth. And
Yeah.
so whatever little things I can do to make that better. But if all I did was my work, if all I cared about was the capitalistic way of just deliver and, the rest will take care of itself, or the Gordon Gekko greed is good.
Yeah.
Um, that's not what Christ calls us to be and do. And I think
Yeah.
I'm just thankful that when I really found out who Jesus was and what he thought of me, I was able to make that leap. I still have a lot of friends to this day who just can't not be that way.
Yeah.
They just cannot walk away from that thing that they have defined themselves by since they can remember. And I think it's hard to do. It's just like saying what a leader does and how a leader is. This is hard to do as well. But I think
Yeah.
by really rooting yourself, because then people will say, and you've experienced like a Procter, oh, it's like a big family. No, 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 it's not. No, no,
Mhm.
no, no company is a family.
Right.
Make no mistake. When there are efficiencies to be had, or you trip up, there is a possibility you will be let go.
Yeah.
Families do not let you go. They do not fire
Right.
you. They run after you. They chase you. They love you.
Yeah.
That's the business world is not a family,
Yeah.
but it can be familial, right? You can make
Yeah.
friends, you can be close, but when push comes to shove, they will shove out.
Yeah.
And so that's the other thing I've tried to tell my kids, I've tried to tell my team, I've tried to tell the broader organization. If this becomes the only thing that identifies you as you, it might not be fine right now, but one day it will not be.
Yeah.
Please have something else which defines you as you.
Yeah. I
So
think that idea of rooting yourself in the family of God
yeah,
rather than rooting, yes, we have work there. And work by nature is temporary. Like it's
yeah,
not the only thing we will ever do. And the Bible's really clear. Like it's not our works, it's talking a little bit about good deeds, but it's not our works that win us, some kind of spot or recognition.
yeah,
He loves us just because we are, and he loves us that way, regardless of what our job is. So that was really, really well said. Okay, you've referenced a couple times, and we're going to dig into this whole topic of career transition stuff. This season on the podcast, we're talking a lot about career transitions, and you're in one right now. You
mhm,
are in this transition. I really would love for you to share with us a little bit about either maybe it's this transition or some other transition, but how has God played a role for you in career transitions? Like I said,
yeah,
maybe this one in particular, sounds like you have quite a story about this one, but could be
yeah,
any of them. How has God played a role in how you've navigated your career?
yeah. So I'll give you two because I
Okay.
think they were so God ordained.
Yeah.
And I've never audibly heard God go, Kirk, go work here, or Kirk, move from, never. I hear God through his word and through other people. People say things, I'm like, ooh. But the key for me is being tuned into the channel that God's speaking to me on.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
when I am like regularly practicing spiritual disciplines like prayer, community, reading scripture, being involved with people who are godly, I hear God more. Like I understand, is it consistent with the character of God? And would it be consistent with something that would benefit me more than harm me? Like those are, because we all make choices that are challenging. It doesn't mean that they're bad. It just
Right.
means that, God cares more about our character than he does our comfort. And so
Yeah.
sometimes God challenges us and pushes us to be ready for something in the future. So one was when I was at Procter, I said I was planted, I was growing, and I was content. I was the youngest president at the time at P&G. There might have been younger ones post, I don't know. Um, I was, 20 years, 21 years into my career, gotten promoted to be the president of global family care. And I pictured myself my entire career at P&G and never leaving.
Yeah.
And I had a trip out to Google. Well, I had a board mentor, a guy named Scott Cook, who was the founder of Intuit. And Scott, the company gave me him as my board mentor. He's like, Kirk, we're going to bring you out to the Valley for 3 days. You're going to go to, spend a day with us. We'll do a day with venture capitalists and we'll split the last day with some of your digital partners. Well, that last day was half a day with Facebook and we closed up with Google. So we're in this meeting, and the woman at the time, who was the chief HR officer on the business side, um, she said, we were talking about people and how they recruit. And she's like, for example, the most senior position we've ever had open on the business side, we haven't hired yet because we haven't found the right person. And I swear she looked right at me. And I was like, hmm.
Did anybody else just see that?
And I was
Yeah.
like, hmm. But I joked that I was having delusions of grandeur. But I kept having this like, sort of, we laughed and thanked her. And so I'd been having this couple days after we got back, this feeling like I have to prompted me to do something. I don't know what it was. So I told my wife, we were laying in bed one night, and I said, hey, explain her whole story, what happened. And I remember she was reading and she looked over and she goes, she has no idea who you are. But if it makes you feel better, you should probably reach out to her. Just our spouses have a way of just like absolutely pulling us up.
Humbling you.
And so yeah, like just pop the balloon quickly, like rip the Band-Aid. So I reached out and I said, hey, thanks again for having us. It was amazing. What a wonderful little, by the way, you said something. If you didn't say this, just delete this email. But if you did, I was just curious why. And so 10 minutes later, I get an email back. We heard you were perceptive, dot, 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 smiley face. We'd love to catch up. And that's how
Wow.
the Google thing began. And it was a 5-month process from that email to when I actually said yes, 5 months, 20 plus interviews. But I
Wow.
was the one interviewing versus them interviewing me at some point because I'm like, I don't really want to do this. I love Cincinnati. I love P&G. I love my community. I love my faith here. I like everything was like, why would we want to go to California?
Yeah.
And I remember I'm gonna write a book on this one day, but God's breadcrumbs, they were like all of these things that he was laying before me. And I was like,
Mm.
God, really? No. Come on, I'm gonna give you one more reason what to tell me no. And example was I spoke at Crossroads and I thought, all right, we're pretty deep into this now. I'm going to show them who I really am. So I sent them this
Yeah.
message I gave, and it was on building people and how I think about my faith relative to building my team and organizations and so on. And it was in front of 30,000 of my closest friends and online. But I sent it to him, and I thought, I'm not going to hear from him again. Like a week goes by, I'm like, all right,
Yeah.
see,
I
God, I
did it
told
now.
you,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
don't want me out there. And then I hope we can make this work. Google would love you. You will love Google. I'm like, shit,
Wow.
what in the world? Like, come
I
on,
keep
I don't want
trying
to
to.
go.
Yeah. Oh my
Um,
gosh.
but anyway, long story longer, I took the job, and the first year was awful.
Mm.
Went out, I'm being put into the org to build something. And the guy hired me, the chief operating officer at the time, said, you know what, Kirk, the corporate antibodies are going to come out because these are things we should have been doing. We weren't. As soon as
Yeah.
you start building something, you're going to be, and then 8 months in, he leaves.
Oh no.
So here I am kind of hanging in the wind. Then I got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. I'm away from home. You hadn't found a church family yet, no real friends. I'm traveling 70% of the time. Oh, I got stage 4 cancer.
Wow.
But it was one of the best things I ever did. It
Mm.
grew me, and it was a chance to build my testimony in ways that I never could have been if I just stayed comfortable in Cincinnati and, where I was feeling
Yeah.
like no, God led me out there.
Yeah.
And what it might have been, the surgeon for the type of cancer I had was one of the best in the world, or Stanford was right there to treat me, or was it that
Yeah.
I got to share a testimony with tens of thousands of Googlers who'd never had heard somebody talk publicly about their faith before or have God had intervened to save them? Like, I don't know. But
Yeah.
man, I'm so thankful that I had the God breadcrumbs so evident to me and so clear. Now, does that mean I was like, oh, just whatever you say? I resisted. I
Yeah.
resisted. And this one, the transition from being the CEO, it was the fall, it was September of 2023. And my wife and I are getting ready to go over on a church trip with a group of people to Germany to follow Martin Luther's trail for the
Yeah.
Reformation. It was incredible. I love history, intersection of history and faith, and it was such a great trip. But I'm on the plane and I'm in Atlanta, and I jokingly say that the flight attendant got down on one knee to propose to me because he comes over, he's like, Mr. Perry, wow, 2.7 million miles flown on
Oh
Delta. That is
man.
amazing. And I looked at him, I'm like, I'm not so sure you should be thanking me for that. And my wife leaned forward and she's like, no, you should be thanking me for that because
Yeah.
all those miles for hours he was away. And I knew I had that many miles flown because I see it on my Sky Miles
On
account.
your statement.
But
Yeah.
but I'm like, to hear it out loud, it just was like this sort of jolt. And I remember, and
Yeah.
I just got this prompt to like pull out all your other apps. Just what do you have? How many do you have? All in. Because they're all
Wow.
fragmented.
Yeah.
4 million miles flown. Now that
Wow.
is excluding my first 2 or 3 years at P&G when they didn't let us keep our frequent flyer miles. So I didn't even have an
Yeah.
account. I had 3 years at P&G at the end where I flew the company plane. And then
Yeah.
at Google, I probably had 2 years worth of company plane trips as well. So I had
Yeah.
several years, didn't even count. So the whole flight over, I'm like, God, what are you telling me? What are you
Yeah.
telling me? And when I started doing the math of when our company was going to go public, and during the flight, I emailed friends of mine who are in banking. I'm like, hey, how much longer would I have to be in the chair post IPO for this to be
Yeah.
something that wouldn't shock the stock and affect all the people that work there? And they're like, yeah, it's like 3 to 5 years.
Mm.
Whoa. So I'm like, maybe this is what God is telling me. Like, do I really want to be in the chair till I'm 63 to 65? Do I really
Yeah.
want to do that? And even though I love it and I'm doing well, like, do I really, like, there's so many other things I feel God calling me to do. So it was this like 3 month prayer of God, just reveal something to me. Like, give
Yeah.
me like a definitive. I don't know. I think God a little bit helps you think about it, at least for me, it's like a Rubik's Cube. Can I get the colors through some work into the right place to be able to look at the whole thing? And for me, it's all these little pieces, talking to friends about it, talking
Yeah.
kind of as soon as I came to this conclusion, like, I think God's leading me to this notion that I just need to step down. Like,
Yeah.
there's no harm in that. There's like, I'm still relatively young and healthy, and I mean, I've never had flexibility in 35 years to just be able to go do things that, I'm not just talking about like going golfing, but I'm talking about
Yeah.
being able to truly help other people, to be able to, have the opportunity to go with my wife and do mission work, to do
Yeah.
things that are not, on my agenda today because I just can't fit them in. And
Yeah.
so I told the company, and we had an orderly transition, a great successor, but I feel so peaceful, I guess is the right word.
Yeah.
I'm not looking back going, man, did I make the right decision? Or boy, I tell people I'm retired. Like, I look up on LinkedIn, what do you put for somebody who's no longer, in the
Yeah.
chair? But I just feel at peace. I feel like it was clearly the right decision. And
Yeah.
it is tough because, I've identified in corporate world for 35 years. And
Yeah.
and for me going forward, it's just a real opportunity to pivot and do something. I've had this run of being earthly successful. How can I be eternally significant? And
Yeah.
That's kind of, and I'm going to use what I've learned in the business world to continue to help do that is the platform to be able to make, hopefully, an eternal kingdom impact.
Yeah. I love both of those stories. Kirk, talk about you being tuned in. You used that phrase earlier in our conversation, being tuned into the right frequency, but being, sensitive to when God is telling you something that is kind of circumstantial in some ways, but when we can read the signs, the breadcrumbs, he will woo us in the way that is the language that we're most able to receive if we're
Yeah.
willing to listen and pay attention. And I love both of those stories because of course there was some resistance. And what I like about the stories is like God sent the breadcrumbs to help you with that transition, to help you confirm that it was really from him, because he'll speak to us through other people
Yeah.
and through, these thoughts that come to our mind that we wouldn't come up with it on our own, and through, and a flight attendant who says congratulations on all of your miles flown. And it's just, I think we sometimes we underestimate God, and we think the only way he can speak to us is through some kind of a thundering boom, but
It's funny
it's
because
usually not the way he does it.
when you think of the Bible in the day of Pentecost and people were speaking languages, they didn't normally speak, or I think in a way, I mean, I know there are churches and people that believe like that happens today. I think for me, how I interpret that in today's world is people speak the language I understand.
Yeah.
It might
Yes.
be English, but it's the variation on the English where they get my
Yes.
attention in a way that I can understand because of my unique set of experiences or leanings or bent or whatever that happens to be.
Yep.
But I'm more open to that because of the way they deliver it. And
Yeah.
I think, that's in choosing to follow God is never easy.
Yeah.
Like people say that, I'm like, no, no, it's
Right.
not. It's not easy. Because like I said, I would not have pulled my family. Talk about God speaks to you, right? My oldest daughter says we're deciding. She's like, my gosh, you guys are moving to Sri Lanka. You're moving to California. I mean, like you guys act like you're having to go over to the other side of the world.
Yeah.
And then my now 24-year-old, who ironically works at Procter in marketing and baby care,
Oh,
um,
that's awesome.
he was 13 at the time. He said, Dad, it's Google, it's California, and you make toilet paper for a living. And it was one of
There's
those
some
moments
perspective.
where, yeah, we were like having a family discussion on because I was like, I don't want. And I thought for sure one of the kids would be like, you guys are crazy. Just stay here.
Yeah.
Why would you do this?
Yeah.
All of them were like, yeah,
That's
let's do this.
awesome.
Let's do this.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Kirk, this conversation has been so fun. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your experience and your journey with us. I know it's going to benefit a lot of people.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and it's been a real treat to catch up with you again.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, and we will catch up again soon, I'm sure. Well, I hope that you'll agree with me after that conversation. Kirk is just so approachable and so wise. It just felt like there was so much practical insight in that conversation. I usually have 3 takeaways. I actually have 4 from this conversation. The first one was I really loved Kirk's definition of leadership. It was so thorough and so clearly tied to what we learned from studying Jesus as a leader. Kirk said that the what of leadership is casting vision and caring for and nurturing people and executing for results. And then the how of leadership is all about humility and authenticity and vulnerability and resiliency. And we talked about how we can see all of those characteristics, all of those components in the life of Jesus and in his ministry and in his work that he did as a leader. Second big takeaway, I loved the conversation that we had about feedback. And it's obvious that in the roles Kirk has been in, he's created a really safe environment for feedback by role modeling vulnerability and by sharing how he has acted on feedback that he receives. This is such a powerful tip. I talk to so many leaders who want feedback, but they're not getting it from their teams. And Kirk's practical examples of how he's done that were so valuable, so valuable. Third takeaway was from the conversation that we had about how do we separate our identity from our profession, and Kirk's story about how that shift happened for him when he really met Christ and understand who God says he is so powerful. I really thought that was powerful. And I also really want us to think about these questions that Kirk was saying that he has asked of his leaders that have led him over time, right? Things like, hey, do I have to come to this meeting tonight? My kid has a soccer game. Or I really don't want to travel on this day because there's something going on at home, something like that. And the powerful test of making the ask to prioritize something different because your identity doesn't come from your profession. And here's the trick in this, guys. I think if we're willing to ask those questions, if we're willing to say, this other thing is important to me and I want to use that, I want to honor this other priority, we're willing to ask that question, we probably don't have our identity completely rooted in our profession and our job. But if we're really scared to ask that question, if we're afraid to ask for permission to make something else a priority, it might be a sign that our identity is a bit too tied to our work. So if that's where you are, I just want you to be thinking about that and considering it. The last big takeaway I had was I loved the way Kirk talked about his career path and how God has left these beautiful little breadcrumbs and guidance for him in these big career transitions that he's made. And he just reminded me how important it is that we be tuned into, he talked about being tuned into the right frequency, right? Really to pay attention to the signs that God is sending us, whether it's a conversation with a flight attendant or a comment by someone at a meeting. Those were two of Kirk's examples. Just we want to be sensitive to where God might be leading us from a career standpoint. So, always have a challenge for you coming out of these conversations. A challenge for this month. I really want to encourage you to ask for some feedback from your team. See if you get any critical feedback. If you don't, or if you don't get very much critical feedback, you may want to go back and figure out how do you create the safety, maybe leverage some of Kirk's tools that he shared with us or his ideas that he shared with us today, but work to create the safety that your team needs in order to give you critical feedback. It'll make you a better leader. It'll make you a more collaborative leader, and it's a win for everybody. If you need some help doing that, reach out. I'd love to chat. Feel free to set up a free coaching consultation. We can talk about that. We can talk about other stuff too. I'd love to connect with you. Well, thank you again for joining us. Hey, if you loved this episode, it would be so valuable to us if you would give us a rating and leave us some comments. It means so much to us. Well, thank you again to Kirk Perry, and I look forward to seeing all of you next time on The Faith Driven Leader.